Hey, everybody. So this week we are continuing to read some examples of literacy narratives. We will read, there are two readings. One is Only Daughter by Sandra Cisneros, and the other one is an example student essay from one of my previous English 2089 students. So that essay is actually used with permission. And I do often, if I've read something from a student that I thought was exemplary or I think would be good reading for future classes, I will usually ask permission for that essay to be used. Sometimes students don't mind having their names published. And this student didn't mind, but I have redacted their name anyway, just to protect their identity. Anyway, so our stories here this week, we're exploring more stories across cultures with Cisneros, especially. Let me advance my slide. The Only Daughter by Sandra Cisneros. So Cisneros is a Chicana writer. This is an example of a literacy narrative, of course, done by a published writer, right? Somebody who makes their living as a writer. So it was published in 1990 in Glamour magazine. So that's just kind of a pop thing instead of a literary magazine. But Cisneros has also published a couple of really good books. The House on Mango Street, which I really enjoyed reading. I read that in my one of my graduate classes. And I encourage you, if you enjoy what she wrote in this short literacy narrative, Only Daughter, I encourage you to seek out her other publications because she writes from a unique perspective, not only as a Chicana, but also as a female, one of 7 children, and she grew up with 6 brothers. And because of, Chicano is Mexican American, right? Her parents were Mexican American, and of course, she grew up as a Mexican American, and so a completely different culture than what we might be used to in rural Claremont County, right? A unique perspective, nonetheless. So she frequently writes on her Chicana identity, and this example is certainly no different from that. So in this narrative, she really talks about how she grew up working class Mexican American, and her struggle of being accepted as a writer by her father, especially. He, in the different culture, there was more emphasis placed on the men than on the women. Especially one seeking a woman seeking a career in writing. So she confronts a lot of the struggle that she was dealing with, and ultimately she had her father read one of her stories because she translated it into Spanish, or because it may have been published because it was published in Mexico. Her father decided to read it, and ultimately she conveys the sense of enjoyment that she got from her father having finally accepted her as a writer, and that she was good at what she was doing. And so I encourage you to read it. The key quote here is, "I have 7 sons." He meant siete hijos, 7 children, but he translated it as sons. So she's talking as her father. This was something her father had said. "My papa. He didn't mean anything by that mistranslation, I'm sure, but somehow I could feel myself being erased. I'd tug my father's sleeve and whisper, 'Not 7 sons, 6, and 1 daughter.'" Right? So this whole idea is she really felt kind of invisible in her family, and that struggle of trying to get her father's acceptance and recognition as an individual. So I find that this piece kind of resonates with students, especially those who might be from a different cultural background. I know that we have Especially in these online classes, we have students who come from a variety of backgrounds, a variety of locations. You might not be in Ohio, you might not be in Claremont County, right? You're taking this course, it's available for all UC students. So you could be in UC online and be based somewhere else outside of the country even. But this piece is good because not only of the cultural perspectives, but also because it resonates with students from different cultures, but also students who might be first generation students who might be confronting some of the similar things that Cisneros dealt with as she was going through her education. Oftentimes, as first generation students, our parents don't have the experience of college, and so they can't really help us navigate those waters. And sometimes we might confront some hard things, right? We might not be accepted by our families in the pursuit of education, or we might not be supported by the people around us because we're doing something different, right? So as first generation students, that's also something to think about. Another thing, you might see some connections with this story and some of the things that you've been reading in previous weeks, especially if you had an opportunity to read the optional reading of Deborah Brandt's Sponsors of Literacy. So you might think about how Cisneros in her story has shown some of this different literacy sponsors from her own father, her college programs, the NEA, UC Berkeley, and even her father having some literacy sponsors such as sports magazines, tabloids, and the fotonovelas. So that's something to think about. So remember that sponsors of literacy, that refers back to, I think it was week 1, where we had the definition, and I'm going to pull it up from the textbook that I used to use. So bear with me for a sec, because I know it's in the glossary, and I want to remind you of what a sponsor of literacy is. So just one second. Literacy sponsor. So it's a term, again, coined by Deborah Brandt to describe people, ideas, or institutions that help others become literate in specific ways. A sponsor could be a parent or sibling who taught you to read, a teacher who helped you to learn to love books, or a manufacturing company that requires its employees to be able to read. The sponsors of alphabetic literacy, that is, word letters and words, right, in your life might be very different from the sponsors of visual literacy, musical literacy, or other forms of literacy in your life. Pandora, the musical subscription service, for instance, can be a musical literacy sponsor for people who use it. So that was just an example of a different type of literary sponsor. We don't have to think of literacy sponsors simply in alphabetic text, right? We can think of literacy sponsors more widely. So some of the take-home points for this reading: gender norms affect both access to literacies and what others expect an individual to do with those abilities. Parents figure prominently in an individual's literacy development and their perceptions of success. And if you are someone who didn't grow up with parents, or you only grew up in a single parent household, or perhaps you had extended family that were helping your care, those parents or those people will also figure prominently in your literacy development. Language and culture act as powerful forces that shape literate development. And the double meaning of the word only, sole or singular, versus just or merely. So only daughter, right? She's the single daughter, but she also has that double meaning in the title of just a daughter, right? She doesn't feel like she matches up to her male siblings. So that's Cisneros in a nutshell. Now on to A Quest for Literacy Clarity. Again, this is an example from one of my previous students who took the class in spring of 2022. And I really enjoyed this example. In many ways, it is similar to the the literacy narrative that was in the previous week from Juan. So this was written in 22, and again, the student similarly explores their Asian American identities. Specifically, this student grew up in a Vietnamese household or household of Vietnamese immigrants. So we have a multi-generational family dynamic going on there. And the key quote here that I pulled from the paper, I worked tremendously hard to learn the proper English, despite losing a part of myself. This process has proven to be difficult and exhausting, but I have come to realize how I show my literacy through my words, actions, art, pictures, and more. I slowly learned that there is not one singular way to express or communicate my thoughts. I developed my own concept of literacy through my culture and experiences. So again, we have this idea that literacy doesn't necessarily have to center only around words and text, right? But it can be extended to, think about how we express ourselves through art, through music, pictures, so on and so forth. So some of the key take-home points here in this example: literacy goes beyond just the fluency in a language. It encompasses various forms of expression, including art and journaling. The struggle between maintaining their native language and adapting to English showcases the complex relationship between language and identity in this essay. And despite the author's challenges, her dedication to improving their skills through tutoring and workshops is a testament to perseverance. And that's often the case for those of you who have grown up in a culture that really strives for excellence and wants people to be successful. And the narrative underscores the importance of finding personal ways to express thoughts and emotions. So again, the author stresses here the idea that we're kind of expanding our idea of literacy, that it's not just fluency in language, it's not just being able to decode reading, right? To decode words and sentences, but can also include various other forms of expression. So I hope you enjoyed these readings this week. And if you have any questions for me, you know how to get in touch with me. Take care, everybody. Have a fantastic week.